So as I mentioned to Kevin and Holly, we're just going to do a quick introduction, have them introduce themselves first. The topic for today is how to manage community management teams. And we had a couple questions that were submitted in advance. And then towards the end, we'll do open Q&A for any topic related to community. How does that sound? Okay.
Great.
So I wanted to invite Kevin first and then Holly to introduce themselves and their background and about the topic, how they manage their community management teams.
Sure.
Kevin?
Mm-hmm. So hi, everyone. My name again is Kevin Lau. I actually came from the Marketo acquisition. For those that know the Marketo business, we got acquired by Adobe about 2 years ago. So I've been at Adobe now for about 4 years. And I lead, it's called customer advocacy for the Adobe digital experience business. So that's more of their enterprise solutions. It's where Marketo kind of sits within that, the mix of their tech stack. And so some of the things that I run are, we have our online community, which we have, it's powered by Khoros. And then we also have our user group community. And then we also have like, sort of like smaller communities as part of like our elite like advocate programs. But previously I've worked at different types of tech startups, both on the B2B and the B2C side. I used to work at Google managing one of the YouTube communities. So very different in terms of like how they would run things, but I'm happy to share some of the learnings I've had over the years.
So first of all, sorry if I'm looking distracted. I have a puppy and like 2 seconds ago, he decided he wanted to move a really loud cup around the floor and now he's exploring. It's no good. So sorry about that. So I am Holly Firestone and I have been in the community field for a while now. I started at a nonprofit back in 2010, building community for alumni that got back from a birthright trip, if you're familiar with that. And then moved into more business-focused community. So at a different startup that was focused on SEM. And then I feel like I got my big break when I moved to Atlassian. And there was a community program started there, but it was in the infancy basically. And so I got to spend, a good amount of time kind of building the foundation for the Atlassian community. We started with a user group community. And then built a community for the user group leaders as well. And that was really, really exciting to work on, especially at that time. So I got to see it grow and now it's amazing to see what the team has done there. Left Atlassian and went to Salesforce and I spent the last 5 years at Salesforce. First, I was running the MVP program and the user group program, but eventually grew into, running all of the different community programs at Salesforce. So the online community, MVP program, user group program, community conferences, bunch of different things like that. So it's a really amazing experience too. Huge company, incredible community. And then I left about a year ago, almost to the day, to start working at the company I'm at now, Venafi. And at Venafi, I am focused, my role has shifted a little bit recently. So I'm focused on building a community across all of our audiences. So customers, developers, ecosystem partners, and yeah, everything, but from scratch. So it's really exciting to get to build something, for a startup again. And yeah, so that's where I'm at now in the very beginning stages all over again, but it's fun.
Okay, so I just wanted to build on that. What are the differences between managing a information security company and Salesforce? Is there a big difference, a startup versus an established company?
It's a good question. I mean, just being a manager at either of those places, well, it's interesting because I'm just about to hire my first hire at Venafi, so I haven't been a manager here yet, but any startup that I was at, I think, Salesforce is just a different beast entirely. And the hiring process is really crazy at Salesforce. So I think there's just kind of what's the word I'm looking for? There's just a lot of like process and rigor around managing a company that's that large. There's just things that are completely out of your control versus, at a startup, you can be a lot more nimble and flexible and kind of make your own rules in a way that you most certainly cannot at a company like Salesforce. So great examples like career path. You've got this level and then you go to this level after this amount of time, this level versus like at a startup, it's a little bit looser and can be.
Cool, thank you. Kevin, I wanted to ask about building communities. You've started, it seems like you have a lot of experience in different kinds of communities. Can you talk a little bit about how, or the many ways that you've learned how to manage other community managers?
Yeah, I think it only comes down to, finding what everyone's sort of passionate about. Like, regardless if you're managing community for like developers or we were doing something with like TV enthusiasts at Google and some other stuff. But I think it also comes down to is the teams that you work with, if they're passionate about helping their customers be successful, whatever the product or solution is. I think inherently they have to love what they do. And because you're talking to people every day, regardless if it's virtually like in this format or, meeting them in person in like a in-person user group, I think it comes down to just kind of like building those relationships. And sometimes it could be very overwhelming too, right? Because like if you're messaging 100 people or 1,000 people, you have to kind of build in that scale and you have to put together processes or ways that you have some flexibility so that they don't feel like they have to respond to necessarily every single message, but you kind of empower them to kind of build scale within their community. And so I try to encourage them to kind of build sort of like, top contributors. I think it's kind of what Holly mentioned with like having an MVP program. You have to have customers or partners, whoever they are, to be sort of like your trusted eyes and ears within the broader community in that sense to help you build that scale, because it's hard for one person or even like a team of 5 people to do that when you're managing a community of like 1 million plus users, right? Mm-hmm. So I try to encourage them to approach it where they are, they feel like they're part of the community themselves, but then also so that they're being empathetic and they can kind of build the scale that they need to grow as it continues to evolve.
Cool. Guys, do you have any questions for Holly and Kevin?
Yeah, I do. And this one actually was from one of the people who RSVP'd for the event. And I also asked it when I RSVP'd for the event. When this is for both, when is the right time to hire a new team member versus empower community members to support with certain programs?
Kevin, you want to go first? Do you want?
You can go first if you want.
Sure. I think it just depends on, making sure that in the beginning you are taking a step back and looking at what the goals are that you're driving to, will help you determine exactly how you want to get to those goals. So I think about, I need to hire people for the foundational elements. And then I think about like foundational and operational. And then when I think about scale, that's when I think about bringing in community members, scale and authenticity in a way, so that they're bringing in the engagement and content that makes it a community. So yeah, kind of foundation operational pieces, are run by the community team, but then those things would empower the community to build and scale and engage.
Yeah, 100% agree with Holly. I think the only thing I would probably add is just, I think it comes down to, if you're to be able to prove impact, community is can be some of those difficult areas where, how do you prove value from community engagement? And how do you prove, like, are you able to reduce the number of tickets that come in as it relates to kind of like support issues? Is it influencing, potential new business or retention efforts? So I think if you can make the case of, showing that your team is constantly helping the company either save money or make more money. That's typically what, the VPs and the higher ups will care about at the end of the day. So if you could justify that, then I think you're in a good place, and you can make the case for hopefully getting more than one person to join your team in the future, right? And continue to scale from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it always comes back to, like, what is the purpose of the community and why are we actually here? And that is another question that someone had, was how do you communicate the value to your leaders then? So is that kind of what sets you aside as the leader of the community team? Like, you're the bridge between the community managers and the executive team?
I think it's sort of communicating both ways, where it's like you communicate up with the stakeholders on, what's the value that you bring to your business. But then also it's kind of communicating down to your team and your peers and your customers too. It's sort of being that liaison that, I'll just give you an example. Like when we got acquired by Adobe, a lot of users were worried about, is the product still going to be supported? And they were flooding the community posts with stuff like, oh, are we still going to be, is the color still going to be purple? Which was something that they were very, very passionate about, because Adobe's a red branded company, all the way down to some of like the smaller nuances as far as like feature functionality and things like that. So it's definitely it could be a mechanism to help drive engagement and get that voice to the customer, which I think is what companies, especially right now, care about. And we've also seen a big shift in community engagement and community investment, especially during COVID, right? Because when companies were kind of, thinking about their investment of how do we drive greater retention efforts, it comes down to like, do we have a good sense of what customers really care about right now? And do we have a sense of, are we staying competitive compared to other solutions out there that they might be able to buy because it's cheaper, or, whatever the case might be?
So I definitely see, the bridge between, it being in a leadership role, being the bridge between the community team and the execs, and executive leadership for sure. But I think there's something to be said about educating and empowering your team to be able to send that message to, because community teams are usually pretty small, and you have to get that message out pretty wide, whether it's with your customers or the rest of the company. That awareness is just extremely important. And I learned usually I have all my epiphanies because I've done something completely wrong. And that's where one of these came from, which was that when I was at Salesforce, I had 2 people on my team that were focused on the user group program. I had one person that was focused on the MVP program. And then I was the only one that could really talk about the community as a whole. So I would go into a meeting with another team, and obviously Salesforce is huge. There was a lot of education there, but they would want to know, how do I leverage the community? What can I do? How can my team get involved in the community? I was the only one that could have that conversation with them. It wasn't like somebody that was running the user group program was equipped to talk about all the ways and all the levers they could pull. So that was something that I had to fix in how we distributed our team, so that everybody would be able to be that advocate for all the programs and be able to push things forward no matter what, for, the kind of this wider distribution of information, especially internally. So definitely a bridge, in terms of like getting messages to the exec team for sure. And obviously same way back, getting messages from the exec team to the greater team. But I think empowering them to go out and do a lot of that as well is really important. And even, people on your team are going to interact with the execs too. You never know. At Salesforce, you're going to end up in the elevator with someone crazy, or you might end up in a lift with the co-founder of Salesforce, and you need to be able to talk about, what you're working on and what the team is doing at a very high level. So I think it's a mix, making sure that you're also empowering everybody to have those conversations at any level.
I don't know where Tina went. Oh, she's back. But I can just ask some more questions from this list. Unless Kim, Oliver, Carlos, Weiss, do you have any questions on the top of your mind?
I have one question from Mike, and then I can give this to you, Beth. I sent this question to Kevin and Holly previously. Michael was saying, how do we teach the rest of our organization how to use the community as a tool to achieve their goals? So instead of relying on just the community manager to advocate for the community, like coordinating with the product management team, for example, or marketing, so that they also can look at a community as a way to accomplish their business goals.
This is super fresh for me right now because I just did this. So I basically went on a listening tour, and I met with every exec at Venify where I work. And we had a conversation about what their goals are for the next year. Nothing to do with community. Like what are you trying to accomplish? What challenge are you facing? What technology are you using? Who on your team is responsible for what? Just truly a listening tour. And I met with every single one of them, which is a huge commitment of time for me and for them. But that helped me determine exactly what I wanted the strategy to look like. And part of that is that each one of those exec team leaders now has a shared goal with community. So they're responsible for making that OKR happen. And so it trickles down, right? In terms of awareness and responsibility about engaging with the community. Everybody knows they have a role that they play. Everybody's responsible for community. Even our HR team has a shared goal with community. So I think that's part of it. And that shared goal is actually that new hire training, there's community content, or sales kickoff for our sales team, there's community content. So raising awareness internally as well. So I think that paired with engagement guidelines and templates for people at the company to use just to enable them to do it the right way, is, how I would recommend going about that.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I think it's kind of, I also find it really surprising that sometimes when teams say that they want to get customer feedback, like they're almost afraid to talk to the customer directly. Yeah. And they'd rather hear from it on a survey or from like a third party person instead of like meeting them where they are, because it's almost like they think they're scary and they're not normal. But whatever the case is, like we've been trying to encourage especially a lot of the product teams, which they might be a little bit more introverted and they just maybe don't feel as comfortable like talking to someone face to face. But with a community like an online community, it should be easier because you're essentially kind of communicating through like a forum or other types of like chat functionality, right? So we've been trying to encourage our more technical teams that if they want to get to the root of what customers are talking about and to be able to get that, not just hear from like one person, but hear from like hundreds, if not thousands of individuals, you can hit your goals in terms of like, making sure that this new release resonates with your audience much faster than if you were just to read, some surveys or whatnot. You get sort of like that tangible feedback, which sometimes, of course, it's not always going to be positive, but I think you get that raw feedback and that reaction of what people are actually thinking about, which helps to influence your roadmap and whatnot. So I think that's sort of the aspect that maybe is not talked about as much. But I think also to Holly's point about the shared goals, like I think engagement can't just be like a marketing effort. It has to be like the entire company has to be on the same page for it to be successful. Because oftentimes if they just say it's marketing and you're not hitting the goals that you need or the metrics or the engagement, then it's one team that, falls on their sword and they get blamed for it. But when it's a shared responsibility and you're getting your technical teams to be involved because they have the expertise and they can contribute to the conversation, plus the customers feel a little bit more loved when they start to see Adobe people kind of being involved. It creates much more of a engaging relationship and more sticky at the end of the day too, right? Like people want to come back week after week and month after month, and you start to build those relationships, which is ultimately kind of like why we're doing this at the end of the day, right?
So, Kevin, to clarify, do you have regular sessions where your internal teams are able to engage with some part or members of the community?
We try to be a little bit loose. So we have some guidelines, but we don't have necessarily a fast and hard rule like you need to be in community every single day for this amount of time, because they all have day jobs that they have to manage. So we try to encourage them periodically, at least a couple times a month, pop in, see what people are talking about, get a sense of what's top of mind, and also just show customers that you're there for them if they need help with something. And we've definitely seen sort of a positive sentiment just in terms of how it's changed just over the past couple of years, because historically they would just push it off to someone else and say they didn't have the time to do it.
Right. I love the shared goal. I love that Holly went out and did a listening tour to get the goals from each department and to try and craft shared goals. So it's our goal, not just their goal. And what I envision, I have a background in product marketing. What I envision is if there was an aspect of my product that I wasn't sure about or people were complaining about, I would use that as a great excuse to approach Kevin and say, hey, we have this thing, we need to decide A or B. Do you have members of the community that maybe we can do private conversations with, kind of stuff?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Anybody else have questions in this thread? Beth, go ahead. Thank you.
Sure, I can just read from this list. So, oh yeah, so this is a good one. And actually, you could both probably speak to this as leaders from global companies. In a global community, what factors create sense of belonging to all team members and keeps them motivated when we have people coming from different cultures, locations, languages, time zones, etc.?
I'm going to ask a question, follow up that question. Did it say what keeps them motivated? I guess.
What creates a sense of belonging?
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
The second half of the question is what keeps them motivated? But I'm I don't know what would make them unmotivate that. I need to think on this one for a second. I guess, sorry, Kevin, you could go first. Sorry, I'm talking a ton.
I think the underlying thing that brings people together for a community is they're passionate about one, whether it's one solution or one common purpose, right? We joined the CMX community because we're community professionals, right? So we have that kind of shared underlying identity. I think that sort of helps to translate regardless of where you are by location. Just given this call here, we have people from all over the world, and we have sort of that shared understanding of what we're talking about. I think the other thing too that kind of helps is the fact that usually if you have a community, you have some type of gamification built into it. And so there's sort of these inherent rewards or systems to help people move to the next level or the next tier, right? And so we kind of break it up into three areas, right? We have this sort of the ability where it's you join community because you can help build your personal brand, your reputation, right? The second one is around like you get to meet other peers and you get to network with your fellow professionals. And then the third piece is usually around some type of rewards or swagger, if you want to do it that way. So those are kind of the things that are like help you, build the relationship and build the foundation. And then it starts to grow from there. And then people just, it becomes part of their natural routine and they want to come back all the time.
So I am going to answer, I'm going to answer this question. I heard it a little bit differently. I think more focused on a team and a sense of belonging, which ultimately ends up leading to a community and a sense of belonging. So a few things. I think that the onboarding experience is a really important way to kick off your relationship as a team. One of the things that we did, that I did for my team, was that every time we onboarded someone, we gave them like a gift basket, but it was with something really random and unique from each of us, with a story behind basically why it represented us. So like mine was, I always put in a wind-up toy of Slink from Toy Story, because I love wind-up toys. I think they're hilarious, and I love weenie dogs. So that was like my explanation that I would give. But you learn something really unique about everybody on the team right when you jump in, and something unique but also kind of weird. And I think that everybody just wants to feel their real authentic self, on a team. And so seeing, kind of some quirky things from everybody on the team is a really nice way to get started. So I think the onboarding experience is really important. And then celebrating successes as well. I think that you have a feeling of belonging when you know that you are appreciated on a team. And so making sure that you're thoughtfully celebrating everybody's successes on the team. And that's, successes obviously with stuff that they're doing as a community manager, but anything that comes up, you can turn into an appreciation and celebration. I think, like I said, knowing that you are valued and appreciated creates a sense of belongingness as well. I'm trying to think what else. And then of course, kind of goes with being valued and appreciated, but having a really clear role and understanding of what your role is and where it goes. I think that if people are very confused about how their role differs from somebody else's on the team, it gets really fuzzy. And so that creates it creates a little bit of a rift or tension if nobody knows exactly what their role is or what they're supposed to do or whose responsibility is what. Which also goes along with really great communication. So that's part of onboarding too, is how does this team communicate? What are the best ways to communicate? How do you want to be communicated with? Setting all of those things up from the beginning is really important. So definitely onboarding and that whole experience and setting expectations, making sure that you're celebrating successes, and then, being thoughtful about careers and roles and goals.
Questions, Beth?
Well, there aren't any more from the RSVP list, but I guess I would love to hear a little bit about job descriptions, and not necessarily like how to write a job description. But you said coming from a corporation like Salesforce, and there's all these very clear steps, very clear levels that have been identified and defined. How do you kind of define that for yourself when you're starting a team? How do you define that? Is it just like making it up?
Oh, for me?
Either. Everybody.
Yeah. Kind of. I mean, it depends. I think that for us, we have to be our biggest advocates, because I was just tweeting this yesterday that like you'll read a job description, it's like 15 years of community experience, senior manager. What? That makes zero sense. So I think part of it is advocating for ourselves in what these roles are, what the scope of responsibility is. For what I'm doing now, I came in a completely different role than where my role is going and what my scope of responsibility is. But when I think about who I want to hire and what, skill set I want them to have and what experience I want them to have, then I have to be the biggest advocate for that. We as leaders have to make sure that we are fairly titling and compensating the people that are on our teams, because nobody else is going to do it for us and nobody's going to understand like we will. So I think that that's kind of the first piece of it, is making sure that we are looking at the community industry as a whole, and we are really valuing community expertise as we build out our team structure and leveling and how we scope out our roles. I cannot stress that enough. I talk about it all the time, is that I think that now we know, and everybody in the entire world knows, that communities are really, really valuable for businesses, but we still have not quantified the value of an experienced community professional in a way that, right now it's no-brainer to build a community for all these businesses, but it's not a no-brainer to hire a director, VP, chief community officer. So we have a lot of work to do there. And I think that making sure that our teams that we bring in the people that we bring in are leveled appropriately will only help us.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's oftentimes I think these expectations that a lot of these executives have is that, we should build a community because every other company is doing it, and it's, we need to look like we have thousands of fans that love our product, right? But then when it comes down to like the actual hiring, it's like, oh, why don't we just get like an intern to do it for us? We'll get time to do it while they have their day job. And it sounds like we've all kind of been in that situation or heard it firsthand, right? I think that the biggest thing that we usually see that pushback why we're not getting maybe a more senior person, because we all know that community takes a lot of work and effort. I think it comes down to just making sure that we have, we're able to measure our impact and tell that story more broadly, not just to our peers, but to the higher ups. And it goes both ways, right? I think at the end of the day, if we can articulate how this is driving impact within the organization, that's when we're going to start to see much more of these professionals that are, like a VP of a community or a bigger mandate that's going to impact like customer experience, because usually communities that first, echelon of as a customer goes through whatever that onboarding experience is like, or all the way to the time that they actually have that decision if they want to continue using your product or not. So I think it comes down to that, and I think that's when we're going to start to see more, hefty job descriptions, and hopefully everyone starts to get paid more money too, which becomes a natural piece to it.
I love this topic because so Holly and Kevin, I have two follow-up questions on that. One is for us community managers, and any suggestions, recommendations on how we can move up in our profession, like internally within the company, or how do we, as if I'm a community manager for 2 years, what is the next step up for me? How do I work internally within my corporation to ensure that, I'm using my skills for the, to help accomplish other goals while also not being just pigeonholed that I'm a community manager, right? That's right. One. The second is industry-wide, what do we ought to be doing in order to gain more credibility and visibility and respect and compensation for the different levels of expertise required for community professionals?
Okay, so for the first question, I think it varies greatly depending on the organization that you're at. You've been a community manager 2 years, anywhere, it's going to look completely different what comes next. Do you have someone that's a community professional that's managing you? Do you roll into another team? Do you have to broaden your scope? I mean, I think that's probably a pretty tough question to answer depending on organization. Kevin, I don't know if you would say the same thing, but I think different organizations have the paths there could be a million paths, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean it's so I mean, the whole industry, I think, is relatively new too, where, I mean, I've seen folks that have come from like an event marketing background. Like people think that user groups are like an event. And so, that seems like a natural thing. But I've seen people that were content, their focus was, content managers or support. I've seen that too. So I think it kind of goes through the whole gamut of just different backgrounds. I think just at the end of the day, it's just, you can almost kind of create your own job description too from that, based on like what your passion is and how it's going to influence the business at the end of the day. And so I don't want to necessarily say that there's only like one path to becoming a community professional, because that just doesn't exist. I mean, myself personally, the way that I kind of got involved in it was I started doing, social media consulting right out of college. And this was back when like, Facebook and Twitter wasn't really a big thing that companies were using. And then eventually it was like, oh, how do you tie in feedback and get voice of the customer? And then it started me down that path to community management. And then eventually it was like, oh, how do I continue to make an impact as it relates to the customer experience? I think eventually where it's kind of shifting is that this umbrella term customer experience is kind of going to encapsulate a lot of these different paths that a customer goes through. It's all going to lead to one place eventually. But I think there's a spectrum to how to get there.
I could see that actually even expanding more, instead of being customer experience, being community experience. And that's part of this vision that I sold my company, is that, we had me focused on this tiny group of people, which are our customers, but we have partners and we have developers and we have, all of these different audiences that are really, really important to us, but we all are connected on this shared value of protecting machines from bad actors. Everybody that's in all of these audiences, that's what they care about, the security of machines. And so, we wanted to expand that out, and create a place for everybody that shares that value. And so I hope that maybe we'll see more community success instead of customer success, or community experience. And it's not just about the experience inside of your community, it's the community's experience throughout everything that your business touches, I hope. Tina, one of the things you said is about getting pigeonholed, not wanting to get pigeonholed in community. And I want to be pigeonholed in community. I think that, in one of my roles, I had a manager that she told me community will never be important. And I was so stubborn. She was like, maybe we can find you like a rock star marketing role. I'm like, no, I'm good. Like, I really want to do this community thing. And I was really stubborn about it, but 10 years down the line, all these businesses want community professionals, and there's not that many that this is all they've been focused on for 10 years. I mean, there's a good number of us, but it's not so far and wide. So, being real stubborn about this and pigeonholing myself as community has made me, an expert in this kind of niche. Well, it's not niche anymore, but like in this field, which has served me well. So, obviously I'm biased, and it definitely makes sense to expand your experience and knowledge. But for me personally, I'm very happy that I was in that. I was, very specifically focused on community. I know you asked there was a second part of your question. But
industry-wide, what should we be doing to gain more, to have our community be more respected, gain more professionalism, get the right compensation for different levels of experience required for this job?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm still learning all this myself, right? There's no end to the journey, I guess. Just some stops along the way, but industry-wide, I think we're doing it right, being here and learning from each other and getting our names out there, getting our community's names out there, and thinking, about how your community integrates with all parts of the business. Sorry, my dog is barking. Obviously will raise a lot of awareness for you internally and externally. And then speaking opportunities, I think, are huge. Building your own personal brand, and taking your expertise and helping other people, you'll never lose that way. Taking everything that you've learned and either speaking about it or writing about it or sharing it one-on-one with people that need some mentorship, all of that stuff will help you, help you build your brand, help other people, and help you grow in the industry, I think.
Kevin or Beth? Carlos, Oliver?
Yeah, so can I ask a question? Bit of background. So I have recently taken on a line report in the last month or so for my community, which is the ARM community, which is microprocessors and graphics units. This is my first management role with community, because I've always been a team of one doing this. But I wondered if Holly and Kevin, you had any tips for not only first-time managers, but first-time managers during a pandemic where you've never actually met the person in real life, and all you can do is engage with them virtually at the moment. So I know that's quite a broad question, but any you've had with people would be much appreciated.
Yeah, this year is obviously a challenge for everyone, right? I think that at the end of the day, they're human beings just like we are. And so I think if you could build that relationship with them, just like you're building a community, find out what their hobbies are, things that you guys have a shared interest in. I think also it's helpful to, I try to look back at some of the best managers I've had. And I think what's helpful is, like, oftentimes, obviously, you build that relationship and you kind of assess like their skill level and all that. But I think there's a level of trust that goes into this, especially as, right now when we can't necessarily see what the other person is doing on their computer, right? Hopefully they're actually doing work, right? But I think if you have that trust and sense of, you guys are on the same end of the rope and you're trying to move towards a common goal or vision, it goes a long way. And regardless if they're brand new to the organization, they're entry level, or if they're, a senior leader, I think it goes all the way to the top. It's just, you kind of have to have that sense of trust, and you guys are on the same team.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much.
So I've been remote for about 4 years now. So I've onboarded a few people, not being in person. This is like old news to me with this remote thing, but it does present challenges. It certainly is different than when I was onboarding people when we were all there in person. I think the trust thing, Kevin, even just saying trust, my head almost fell off my body. I was nodding so hard. Trust is so important. And, not just for you to trust them, for them to feel trusted, knowing that you trust them, and vice versa, knowing that you have their back, and that you're going to be there to support them. So I think all of that, is really important. Also, as a first-time manager, even besides the pandemic, this is a really tough job. Any job in community is really, really tough because, there's an emotional attachment to a lot of what we're doing. We're really empathetic people, and we care about helping other people and building up this community, and you build personal relationships with people in the community, but you also get a lot of feedback. You get knocked down a lot. And it's just a very exhausting role. And so being mindful about that, everybody handles everything differently. So even though something may not bother you, it could be bothering someone on your team, like different reactions for everything. And so being thoughtful about that, how things may impact people differently. I think that's really, really important, is making sure that everybody kind of has feels like they're in a good like mental health place of mental health and wellness. But a lot of people also aren't going to want to just come to you and say they're overloaded or whatever it is like that. So kind of being thoughtful about the conversations that you have about too, or being proactive about some of those conversations and making sure that it's a really open space for people to talk to you about that, I think is really important. And I've learned my lesson with that from my team, overloading my team and kind of trying to strive for a level of perfection that it wasn't worth it, and seeing what happens to a team when you don't have that open line of communication, or you are pushing too hard, or, there's a level, they get to a level of just burnout and exhaustion. It's just terrible. And, you learn from that very quickly, and what not to do in the future, but then, kind of building on that and what you should be doing or can be doing. So just keep those lines of communication open, and make sure that you're being proactive about it as well.
And I also want to say the CMX community has been awesome. So feel free to reach out. There are some of us that would love to just chat and just, allow you to just express your thoughts. We know what you're going through. So I know that David wants to do a mentorship program sometime, somewhere, but maybe we can do it one-on-one.
That's actually a really good point, is like, make sure whoever you bring onto your team is part of CMX, and has access to all these resources too.
Yeah. And
people, just being able to have people to vent to is huge, especially people that aren't necessarily on your team or your manager. Amazing resource for that.
Yeah. I think the other thing that goes with this type of role, this type of job, is that it's definitely not a 9 to 5, in the sense that you're working those set hours. I think even just this year in general, like, we're all working more than we normally would be, but as you start to build the relationships with your customers and like your extended community members, I personally find it sometimes difficult to unplug and not reply to something, because you feel like you've built that relationship through your friend and you're so invested emotionally on what the outcome might be. So it might be helpful as you take on this new person to kind of make them feel like they don't need to be on all the time, and there's a time and place to respond. And then sometimes you just have to take it away and just have some downtime, and not try to log in on your phone and your computer at the same time, and try to look at both things and multitask, because it ends up being a recipe for burnout.
Yeah. And practice what you preach, right? Like, if you're going to be working every weekend and on your vacations and all the things, that's what your team is going to think you expect of them. So you can't say like, you need mindfulness and take a break, and then you're doing all the crazy.
Yeah.
So.
I just wanted to do a time check. We have 5 minutes left. So I wanted to invite Carlos or Awais if you have any questions.
I had a question. Hopefully my head still works. Does it work?
You're a little quiet.
Basically, my question is there a secret formula or just like a way to show the executives that you actually need more people in your team, but in a way that's actually formalized, and you can easily show that through a dashboard, and it just shows them like, hey, here's how much work is being put, how many initiatives we have compared with the output? Like, is there a way to show them like, here's what I need and why I need it?
So that's like the $1 million question. I mean, I think it's something we all struggle with, right? Like, if it wasn't an issue, then community teams would have like 200 people on them, and you wouldn't have a challenge at all. I think what we've tried to do is we try to tie everything that we're doing from a community and advocacy standpoint back to dollars and cents to the business. Like, either it's revenue that we're generating, revenue that we're protecting, or helping the company save money. And I think community, you can make the case for all three of those, because you're able to, if it's helping to deflect support issues, I don't know if that's how you guys use your community, but you could actually calculate, and it might take a little bit of work manually to do it, but you can probably figure that out. There's also that piece of like voice of customer, which a lot of companies look at NPS, but I think there's a bigger impact that you can get from your community in terms of finding out like what's the sentiment of your products, or what are customers saying. And if you had to tie it down to like how much companies have spent in the past with like focus groups and all these types of things, like it's probably 10 times more than what would be invested in a community. And so you look at the savings there, and there's some potential as well. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I would just say is just the more that you can align it to how you're being measured against, and if it's helping move the needle in the positive way, then that's how we've been able to get more headcount or whatnot.
I think all of that for sure. There's a bunch of different things that I've done. I think one of them was when I started at Salesforce, we were doing everything out of email, basically. Somebody wanted to be onboarded as a new user group leader, then they would just find an email, they needed login information, there was a bug, blah, blah, blah. It was all through email. So I set up Service Cloud, essentially like a support ticketing system that had nothing to do with our product support, but it was very specifically for community. And so then any community member or leader would email our team or fill out a ticket, and we were able to see all of the volume that was coming in. And then we also labeled them, so we knew what the volume of tickets were, and where we saw the most friction, the most tickets coming in, and we could either solve some of those issues on the front end, or if the volume just grew exponentially, which it did after some point, even when we fixed a bunch of different things, that helped make our case for hiring. So we knew that we onboarded 100 new leaders over a certain period of time, and for every X number of groups we needed a third of a person to manage them, whatever it was. We figured out exactly how to do that related to all of the support tickets that we were getting. And then we kind of took it another layer. Actually, the team that was my operations team at Salesforce did a really amazing presentation at CMX on how all of the systems and technology and operations that they're using to measure all this stuff. But we started really on the back end building everything to measure all of our processes too. Obviously, going back to what Kevin said, to measure impact and business value, but it really helped us figure out who was working on what and where we were spending the most of our time, to help us optimize that, but then to make a case for headcount too.
Amazing. Perfect timing. I want to turn it over to Beth.
Okay.
For closing
remarks. Yes. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you for your questions. Thank you so much, Holly and Kevin, for your very detailed answers and for sharing a little bit of your brain with us tonight. These office hours are put on by Tina and Claire. They're just a really great place to come and air things, get advice, talk about experiences, and have questions answered. So come back next month. I don't know what the topic will be, but Tina's got all kinds of ideas. So
send us suggestions on what topics you want to talk about, Holly and Kevin. It's awesome, fantastic. Carlos, Oliver, and always, please stay in touch. We can help each other out. Thank you, guys. Good night,
everyone.
good morning.
Thanks,
good day.
everyone. Nice meeting you guys.
Hey, everyone.